We did go over the instructions.
Right, Michigan. I'm gonna work out.
We do the space shuttle together. Where you're gonna
remember those.
yeah.
He says put on there.
Yes, so we turn the closed captions on. People do find it somewhat convenient, especially, and they work remarkably well as an automated feature, including taking out all the ums that I'm going to say. So that's super helpful. Yeah, they don't transcript that, which is very nice.
How does it know?
So it's an AI that does it. You can have people do it live. That I found is very difficult because nobody, well, even very fast typists don't quite catch up. And this is remarkably quick in terms of its content. And you don't have to think about it either. I said this to Jen, but you don't have to articulate particularly well. It'll pick things up pretty nicely. Also because you have a very nice microphone, I should point out.
Yeah, the Yeti.
Jen, you wanna?
Yeah, I think we can get started. Yeah. So welcome everybody out there in Zoom and everyone here in the room for the second installation of the Keeping Room series. We're in the Keeping Room, that's where the name came from. So today we're going to talk about a research project that the Sheffield Historical Society embarked upon late last year. And it came about because we received a grant from the Massachusetts Foundation for the Humanities, and the grant is called Uncovering Massachusetts Stories. So this grant is perfect for the project that we wanted to embark upon, which is finding out the untold history of Sheffield's Black community. And basically the time frame that we're focusing on is 1781, and that is the historic date that Elizabeth Freeman, through her actions and her court case, abolished slavery in Massachusetts, thereby making Massachusetts a state where African Americans could live not as enslaved people. And that's way before some of the neighboring states. So Sheffield's very unique in that right because we neighbor both New York and Connecticut, where slavery was not fully abolished till the 1820s. So that in the very beginning, both Elizabeth Freeman's story and the fact that we are a state that's neighboring other states that still had slavery makes Sheffield unique, not only within the country, but also within the state itself. Let's see. All right, let's go to the PowerPoint, Paul.
Okay.
So before I get started, I just want to thank our current team on the research project. From the Historical Society, we have Jim Miller and Elizabeth Wood, who are our archivists, Paul O'Brien, our president, and we're also partnering with Westfield State University, Dr. Nick Ayeda, and then a graduate student, Mike Mahey. So this is a current team, but we hope to expand the team and get some other players involved in it as we progress in our research project. Okay. So here you can see this beautiful woman, a beautiful statue that we erected last year in August. And so that was August of last year. And during the ceremony, people came up to us, both people here in our community and people who were visiting for the unveiling ceremony. And there were questions that they asked that we couldn't answer all of these questions. So this is sort of what sparked our quest to find out more information, not only just about Elizabeth Freeman herself, but also the community that came right after her, the community that she was part of. And up until the early 1900s, we thought was a pretty good time frame for that research. Let's see. All right, the background. All right, so there's some other touch points that we've looked at. You know, the story of Sheffield's Black community is focused around the big events, the Revolutionary War, Elizabeth Freeman's court case, the Civil War. What's kind of interesting about Sheffield is that the very first soldiers to sign up for the Mass 54th, so that's the all-Black regiment that's portrayed in the movie Glory, were from Sheffield. Sheffield, which is far off, you know, very far away from Springfield, very far away from Boston. So what was it about this group of men here in Sheffield that galvanized them to be the very first people to sign up? Yeah, all right, so here's a photo of Edward Augustus Crossley, and he was a Civil War soldier and member of the 54th. And this is him wearing his Civil War garb in the early 1900s. So he could still fit into his uniform, which is pretty cool. And he's standing in front of the stone store. So people here from Sheffield, you might recognize those doors and those windows, which really have not changed in the 100 or so years since this.
We can't see the PowerPoint.
Okay.
You can't see the PowerPoint?
Did you
No.
not,
Thank you for letting us know that.
did you not hit share speed, Paul?
We can't see the PowerPoint.
Sorry.
All right, we'll take a short technical
We will
break.
pause.
We crashed, Paul.
Hit
So,
Don't bother.
down the bottom. Yeah, there you go.
Sure, right.
Yep, only one
Well, the
participant.
folks can share, right?
No,
no.
no, you're hitting the wrong thing.
Hit
Sorry.
one.
Hit the green, the big green. There you go. There you go.
Okay.
And I would go to the one right below it.
Right below.
Okay.
And then share.
Are you guys
There you
seeing
go.
that?
How about now?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We see some thumbs up. All right.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right, so now you can see, as you can see, that that's right in front of the stone store, hasn't changed much in the past 100 years.
Take off the video.
And then
The right
back up
side.
one. Just to-
Right.
Hey, Patricia, excuse me, Patricia Maryland, could you knock off your video for us? You're taking up some screen space on us. Thank you.
You can hit the minimum too.
Yeah.
If you want.
You can also slide it.
There we go.
You're good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Clicker's not working.
That's it.
Oh, because I gotta click back in here.
Let's find out.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
So since people missed, apologies. So this was the statue. Most of you are probably aware of it. This was the image in which Jen was just talking about the questions that people came up to on the statue's dedication day,
Mhm.
asking you our list of folks enrolled in the 54th.
Yes.
And that brings you current back to
Edward Crossley.
Mr. Crossley. So
Yeah. Yeah, so we know bits and pieces of history, but we definitely do not know the full story. And that's what this research project is aiming to do, is to fill in, at least in the very beginning, the different facts that we have about the members of the community, individuals, but also the businesses, farms, things like that, that they contributed to Sheffield society in the early, late 1800s and early 1900s. All right.
maybe I'm closer.
Maybe that's it, but if you don't mind.
That's right.
There we go. So here's an image of, can you see it? Milo Freeland,
Yeah.
and he was the very first soldier to sign up for the Mass 54th, and he was from right here in Sheffield. And his gravestone, if you could see on the bottom, indicates that was updated in early 2000s. That gravestone was put up to commemorate him. So we know that Sheffield's story, it has national reaches. It's not just a story about this town. It's a story about the people who lived in this town, who made history, who changed history, both in terms of abolition, but also in terms of civil rights. And then also the legacy. W.B. Du Bois, he was from neighboring Great Barrington. He had connections to this community. So what was in the water? What was in the air? What were the things that the people of the community were talking about, or the values that they held that spurred them on to change history? Okay. So let's see. So this is another example of some of the bits and pieces of information that we have that gives us a little bit more insight into who the members of the community were as individuals. That's a letter to the editor that Edward Crossley wrote, and basically just boosting the community as it grew. This was about 2 years after he came back from a Civil War battle, and he would go on to become a patriarch of the community. Next slide. And here's some pension records. So some of these records that we have, they do give a lot of insight, but they're few and far between, and generally don't tell the story of the full family, just the members who are actual soldiers. But they give us little snippets of what we might be able to find out, and also clues that will help us know which direction that we go into to try to find more information. All right. Another motivating factor in our embarkment on this research project is to try to both identify and tell the story of some of the African Americans who are buried in Sheffield cemeteries in unmarked graves. Now, many members of the community are in unmarked graves for many reasons, you know, anywhere from the fact that the gravestone was never put there or damage to the gravestones throughout the years. Okay. Yeah, so that's you know, something that helps us identify the people, but not necessarily know who they are. So that's why we're reaching out to you in today's program and future programs, because we know that we're going to be collecting names and deeds and records and newspaper articles, but that doesn't really tell us much about who the people were or what the community was like. So we're hoping that people who have connections to the community, or maybe even recollections from the mid-1900s, that could paint a little bit better of a picture of what day-to-day life was for individuals and the community as a whole. All right. So one thing I always think about akin to this research project, every year we do the Spirit Walk in various cemeteries throughout Sheffield. And we take a little bit of snippets of information, you know, a person's birth date, death date, who their family members were, what their occupation was. And we create a story based upon that. It's about a 10-minute story. If you look at it that analogous to the project that we're doing now, taking those little bits and pieces isn't going to create a complete story of the individual. So that's why we're looking to delve a little bit deeper to find more information other than just the facts, to be able to collect the information so that that story someday might be able to be told in a comprehensive way.
More humanized.
Yeah, more humanized way. So that's a little bit about the research project, and I'm going to pass it over to Nick. He's going to talk a little bit about what resources that we have and what is missing and how we're going to go about finding out a little bit more information as we do this research project.
Thanks, Jen. One of the things that was appealing to me about this project when Paul first contacted me was that we had been working in a couple of other historical societies or locations nearby on a variety of other projects, but not something that was going to perhaps uncover something as interesting as this and as unexplored, I guess would be the word I'd want to use. So one of our desired results, if we're thinking about what we're trying to accomplish today, is not only to tell the community about the project in which we're engaged, but also to try to get, as Jen pointed out, the community involved. What might you, in the recesses of your family histories or other recollections, be able to give us that helps fill in some of the stories? So on the screen right now is one of the electronic tools that we're kind of playing around with, seeing if it's going to work for us as a partial organizational tool. We've been talking for the last couple of months about how to divide up the story between the 1780s and the early 1900s into thirds or quarters, something in that nature, and then identifying at least three kind of concepts that we want to get across: events, family names, family histories, hopefully, and then how they fit into the larger timeframes and so on. This works essentially, this item is a static shot of an electronic board that we're using that we each have access to. We can add information to it. There's a notes section. Paul's been adding various, almost literally, they're screenshots, I think, right, Paul, or JPEGs literally of source material, some of which you've just seen in the shots. And then we're trying to organize it. If you think about this in how you might do this in person, if we were all in the same building all the time, it'd be up on the wall, basically, literally, and we just add sticky notes to it. And this allows us to keep adding information and so on. We can make links off of these as well, and we're just sort of at the beginning stages of experimenting with it. But as we get information, we want to keep adding to this to sort of organize all the various materials. Then we want to start telling some kind of narrative story if we can. But the key issue there is we're gathering the information, and there are sometimes holes in that story, as Jen's already articulated. So we have a variety of different kinds of sources, ranging from the late 18th century to the early 19th century and into the 20th that we're utilizing. And this is anything from tax records to photographs to personal financial account books and so on. And we're going to be showing some of those in a few moments, but we'll have some photographs of things as well. This particular piece is just one way in which you can dig in and find sometimes electronic information on tax records, but sometimes, well, we're going to see in a moment what some of the other things are. So we've got ledgers, and this one's from 1795, connects to the Ashley family, and we're going to be taking a closer look at an early 19th century book, also from this. Personal ledgers could reveal all kinds of information if we look at them in particular.
Jesus Christ!
Oh, somebody needs to mute.
I don't think he's present. So this particular ledger kind of speaks to us how we need to use archival material and historical material to read between the lines to find people. And we'll see a couple of other examples of that. The other reason I want to pause for a moment here is that for a variety of reasons, because of the way history has been written about and generally discussed with both the public and in American schools, these kinds of stories are often underreported. And that's true for historical societies and archival sources as well, where people see things and they say, oh, here's this information, but they're not going to use it. Probably the most famous example for women's history is the Diary of Martha Ballard, which for years and years and years, historians ignored, even though they knew it existed, until Laurel Thatcher Ulrich looked at it and said, there's a really important story to tell here, not only for her life, for Ballard's life, but also for women in general and for communities, in this case, in what was then Massachusetts, but is now Maine. And the work she did had been passed over and ignored by generations, quite literally, of historians. And so that's something that we want to try to write as we're moving through this project. So as I said, there's different kinds of sources. We've got a tax record here. This is from the 1830s, late 1830s. And what Mike Maher and myself are doing is we're coming out and trying to we started actually back at the first 1780s tax records and just started looking for names. I'm not expecting to see necessarily African-American names, but Jim Miller pointed out a couple of things that we want to look for that might point to somebody who could potentially be a member of the African-American community and what we might want to look for. So for example, one of the names we've come across, we keep seeing that this person shows up several times between 1780 and 1784. They don't have a poll tax attached to their name. That's not 100% indicative of somebody's race or ethnicity, because you had to pay a poll tax in order to vote. If you couldn't pay that tax, then it was recorded in the tax records as you simply didn't record it. However, some people weren't eligible to even pay that poll tax in order to be able to vote. So that's maybe a pointer for us. So I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. But Paul alerted me over the last, I don't know what, Paul, week or so, basically 2 weeks ago, I think we started talking about it, to one particular story that we might focus on, and to illustrate for us how difficult it can be sometimes to pull the tales of these folks, these residents of these communities together, and to understand where there are mistakes, there are holes. And again, this is where we hope members of the community can come in and help us out. So William Jones is noted here. This is from, as Paul and Jim have reminded me, an underutilized resource that people, when they find it, they realize it's kind of fascinating, but they don't always use it. And those of you who do your own family history might have made use of this, this service. I certainly was using it with regards to a project I was doing in Blandford over 2021 into early 2022. And it can be very interesting and helpful. And it can also cause more questions. But Paul, do you want to just speak briefly about why we brought up William Jones? What happened here and why we're pausing?
Yeah, thank you. William Jones was someone who was known to us, the 54th, so I knew the name. And I was driving by the Center Cemetery last week, I guess it was, and there was a stone knocked over. And I said to Jim, and we should go check that out. Why was the stone knocked over? And it looked like it might have been a Civil War stone. I couldn't touch it. So last Sunday, a week ago, went over and investigated and found that Williams Jones stone was knocked over. Someone had fallen asleep at the wheel of a car and had gone through part of the fence, knocked over William Jones's stone, and also knocked over his 1-year-old stone, Frank Jones. And that got me on a journey. I don't know if those slides are in here.
We'll get there.
Yeah, got me on a journey thinking about, maybe we use William Jones as a test case for my thinking anyways, to try and find out everything I can find out about William Jones. So that was what I did for the last couple of weeks, just digging into William Jones' life and see what we found.
And so we're going to see a couple of images of that, but the other thing we're going to see as a reminder is, what's the problem with this? What are we missing? Where can someone help us, hopefully, fill in some of these gaps and so on. Also, where sometimes there are errors. So for example, you'll note here on the Find a Grave, and I'll read it just in case people can't see it, but the death of William Jones is recorded here as 1902. He's born in 1818. He does serve in the Civil War. He serves at a somewhat advanced age for the, not in terms of the context of the 54th Massachusetts, but in the context of Civil War era soldiers overall. And if you look at the history of American soldiers, just as an aside, you'll see that the average age kind of progressively moves down from the 19th century into the 20th and 21st century. But the average age was certainly lower than his age at the time. And I believe it's 45, right? I think he was when he enrolled and enlisted. So I want people to think about this for a second. So it's identifying his death here, right, as the 19th of July, 1902. We know where he's buried. And we know a little bit more information that, again, Paul is able to gather. So first of all, yeah, he was above the average age. He was not only above, he was the oldest to enlist in the unit. Like many soldiers, there was a bounty offered. It wasn't always offered in cash. I'm not going to get into that too much, but that's something that we want to think a little bit about, because what motivates people. Clearly in the case of the 54th, there are multiple motivating factors for why people are joining the Army. And one of the most important ones is a desire to help fellow African Americans get out of enslavement. And these are, in many cases, the 54th, despite how it's portrayed in glory, I should point out, most of the 54th were free people. And obviously, the way the story is told, they kind of work in Denzel Washington's character. Anyway, we're not going to get into a film critique here, but so still a great movie. Okay, anyway, so we get a little bit more information here about Jones. So he was a resident and a laborer, and like a lot of 19th century folks who lived in rural communities, he farmed a small plot of land and also worked as a laborer, and that was really common throughout the country. So regardless of your race or background, that you would characterize, or I'm sorry, build up your possible economics by having multiple jobs. So after the war, he returns. We have other records that indicate the value of his property. We then have multiple identifications of when he dies. Is it 1892? So that's one. Is it 1902? And so on. So we have to, this is a question we want to try to dig into here and figure out what is the actual date here. His granddaughter is important as well. We're going to come back to her, and that's Cora Fowler. And we're going to come back to two of his daughters, twins, one of whom is Cora's mother and the other is her aunt. So where do we go looking? Well, one of the things that Paul did is digs into profiles and soldier records and so on, so you can confirm some of the information. This can be discovered a bunch of different ways. I'm going to ask Paul, how did you get to this one?
This was Jim's work in Ancestry.
Okay, so this was Jim through Ancestry. Yeah, and that's the most common way that I tend to find it as well, is using Ancestry. If you have a family name and you know that they're connected to military service, often you can find something related to their military record. It might be very fleeting. I'll just use my own family as an example. Like my grandfather, his draft papers for both the First World War and the Second World War are available through there. First World War is a little odd because he was already in the Navy, so it'd be kind of unnecessary to have draft papers for him, but there you go. He actually joined the Navy before the war started. And then in the Second World War, he's at a fairly advanced age, but still has to fill out the paperwork, and so he shows up in those records as well. His three sons end up in there too, having served in that conflict as well. Another place that we look is the 1900 U.S. federal census. So what we have here is just a screenshot of the census, and we see there's William Jones. It's highlighted in yellow for you. The green below indicates other people who were in Jones's household. So anytime you're looking at census records, especially through Ancestry, it's super helpful when you know the name, right? Because they'll typically nowadays anyway, they'll highlight the name of the person you were trying to find. And then if it's the same household, there'll be some other kind of indicator below. Not always the case, especially if there's multiple spellings. There's a whole bunch of challenges to working with these resources, but generally what I tend to do, and Jim, you may have a comment on this because you do a lot more work with it than I do currently, but if I know the area, the neighborhood, I just start to scroll basically page by page, and sort of look. If I didn't find the person, but I'm fairly confident, I'm pretty sure they lived in that neighborhood, then I'm just looking, and I'm looking for alternative spellings. Because keep in mind that most of this work is transcribed, and we're going to come back to transcription errors in a moment. Most of this work is transcribed by individual people, some of whom are volunteers, and it's hard work. I had a bunch of students working on transcription work last, February 14th for Douglas Day, and some of them took the challenge of looking at the script over here, but they tended to actually go for something typed. They were much more comfortable in the typed world than the cursive world. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jim? But just about like how you find people when they don't show up, or
well, the number one thing for me to look for is variations in the spelling. You have to remember that, first of all, the information is given verbally to somebody who writes it down, and they write down what they think they hear. Right. So you can use your imagination wide open, and you'll come up with something that you never expected to find or couldn't find previously.
Unfortunately, William Jones is a relatively easy name to get through. But what do we find here? I hope, again, there's no quiz, right, for people in the room or out in Zoom land, but what have we noticed already? This is the 1900 census. Now, we saw one record that said he died in 1902. We saw one that said he died in 1892. 1900 census, he's still alive, because no matter what the census taker hears, to Jim's point, they're not going to hear a dead person speak and report themselves as living. And that's, I mean, that's an important thing to think about. So this is why, you know, on Paul's journey through William Jones's life, he kept finding these odd little, what would you call them? Blips, I guess.
You also have to consider that who gave that information?
Right.
Was it William Jones? Was it his wife? Was it his 19-year-old son who said, oh, about the time?
Yeah.
1902, I'm not sure, but about 1902.
And if we go back to the census record on that point, we see here, and it's difficult to read, but for folks, it's William at the top, that's in yellow again, and then Mary, who is his wife. And then we see one daughter listed below. And we see a granddaughter, if we go way down, thank you, yeah. So for the people in the room, Paul's helping out. So Cora's name shows up, and Cora is one of the granddaughters. Now, in the 19th century and early 20th century stuff, if you look into any random, if you look into a community, you look into a city, perhaps that your grandparents came from or parents came from, and so on, you will find that's not uncommon, that there's multiple generations of families living in one place. And we're kind of swinging back to that a little bit here in the early 21st century. So it's not unusual, but one of the things that it interested us is that, as far as we know from different people, but we would love to hear help from folks out in who might know something about the Jones family. As far as we know, the house was relatively small. And so how was it that so many people were living in this space? And that speaks to Jen, your point about, okay, we've got data here, we've got names, we've got statistics. We want to know these people and something about them. Go ahead. Yeah, Elizabeth, sorry.
With this, there's also in the 1900 census, next to the wife's name, it actually says the number of children that she had versus the number living.
Living, yes.
And so that speaks to the small house. She actually had 9 children.
Right, right.
Do you know where their house was?
We're going to come to that. So yes. So, and that's an excellent point. And thank you, Elizabeth, for reminding me to say something about that. When the census changes, different questions get asked. And we might remember that from our own life in responding to the census, whether as children or when our parents did it for us or as adults now. There are different kinds of things that get asked. So literacy, as you pointed out, children born versus children living, which tells us a lot, because that number of, and I believe it's 9 and 4.
9 and 4.
Yeah. So we know that Frank is one of them, and that's one of the gravestones that Paul mentioned earlier that he had seen knocked over. Frank was only 1 year old when he died in the 19th century. So the question about that, where are they? So Paul, you want to explain where we are roughly?
Yes, that is the West Sheffield Road, am I right, Jim?
Yes.
West Sheffield Road. So present day Route 7 would be to right around the Housatonic Railroad track there. In fact, there is a little bit of a road there. So this is over where the the stone guy was, right? Where Joe Wilkinson sells stone. That side road here coming up.
So this one here.
Yeah,
down
here.
This one over here.
Lime Kiln.
Yeah.
That's,
Lime Kiln is north of it.
North of it.
that's the Sheffield Egremont Road.
Sheffield.
And where it says school, and that was the what did I say it was? Do you remember?
Way up top, yeah.
This one here.
Yeah, that's right on the corner of Lime Kiln and West.
The building is still there, but it's a private residence.
Yeah.
It's the Pitcher District.
Pitcher District, yeah.
And I think that house for William Jones might still be there, but abandoned. It's behind so much fencing and shrubbery that I can't see it. And I'm going to try to get permission to go in and ask the people if that could possibly be. And I have to thank Elizabeth for pointing that out to me, that was the Jones house that I had not known about previously.
It's just down the street from us.
Yeah, let us know. We'll go.
Yeah.
So again, that's another
Christmas.
great example of like how you have to piece things together. And you speaking to the point here, Jim, about, well, if you can somehow get permission to get in, one of the other, we haven't really talked about it, but one of the other goods are material culture goods. So what might exist in the remnants of a home that can tell you something? Not only, sometimes it's just a design, how many chimneys, you know, that kind of thing.
And Jim, you think it's on the west side of
Yeah.
West Road?
Yeah, west side, yeah.
We don't want to do that
Yeah.
research on that road, we saw it.
Again, piecing together the story, this again, William Jones, it's a deed transfer, and we need to look into more of this and figure out, okay, is this, what happened with this transfer? And for other members of the African-American community, where can we find access to these records as well? And in many cases, obviously, as Elizabeth was kind enough to show me a couple of weeks ago, like, yes, we can find deed transfers in some cases, the county level, and even older material, just so people know, you can find this electronically. And so it's not necessarily the case that you have to dig into archival work all the time.
It does
to
make
find
you
things.
mourn the decline of the cursive handwriting.
It is increasingly a challenge. I will say my grad student Mike gamely worked with me on one of the tax records, particularly, well, actually 4 years worth. We were looking at 1781, 82, 83, and bits of 84. And he got it after a bit, but he had to get used to the recorder's handwriting, right? And that's what helped him, just beginning to see, okay, this is the pattern this person uses for this particular letter and so on. He still was happier looking at the other stuff, so which I understand. That's no, it's training. Paleography in other historical disciplines is a huge part of the work, actually, particularly if you go into European history. Pre 1500, that's a huge part of the work. So we kept talking about mistakes. So this is actually in front of me as well, but it's on the screen, and this is the record that was transcribed in, as Paul just told me a little while ago here, in 1986. And we see William Jones on here again, and his age is identified. And when I first saw the image of this, I said, well, okay, this is not a 19th century record. And one of the ways in which, and that's part of the historical work too, is figuring out when was the record made. And one of the reasons I knew is just, it was too organized. I hate to say it that way, but like, it's very neat, the columns, it's generated by something automatic. And then of course the typescript at the top. And what they had done is created essentially a registry to record information about the 54th. But as we read along here, we see William Jones, 45. Okay, we're good. And we see his regiment, 54th. His company is B. His background is laborer. And if we just look at some of the other folks here, we'll see farmer, carpenter, farmer, laborer, sailor, soldier, farmer on this particular page. And then other information. And so we see at the top, Henry Jackson was rejected, that E. Johnson was discharged from the 5th Cavalry in 1864, and so on. William Jones killed November 3rd, 1864. No, he wasn't. Okay, we know that. But now this is one of the great parts of the story, right? It's kind of fun. So let's
How do
see.
you know it's the same word?
He's dead. So how do we know? His age, the company, the regiment, and the town of entry. But it's a great question, right? Because of course it's a common name, right? William Jones. And Paul, you did the work, so you want to talk about November 3rd, 1864.
I just searched all the records of the Civil War that I could find of killed in the Civil War, looking for a Jones with that date. Couldn't come up with it. I even looked just for that date who was killed, and I didn't list anyone killed that date. So that's a transcription error, is about the best we can come up with.
That's what we're thinking at this point, that somebody, hopefully no one in this room, was transcribing this work in 1986 and just made a simple error. It could be another person, except Paul went the extra mile and looked and found, well, I'm not sure when somebody died. So 1864, so he's died either in 1864, 1884, 1892, or 1902. We're fairly certain it's 1902. I just want to clarify for everyone, but you know, that's one of the things that you run into, which is why, again, connecting with people who either through family stories or their own documents that aren't here at the Historical Society can really help tell this story a little bit differently. I'll just close out with this. I think it's just another piece on Jones, and we see, where is he? Here he is in the tax records, and we see, so he's identified with the blue square around him, and we see that district reference. So I heard some people reference it. So the way the tax records were identified, they're saying what neighborhoods people are in. So picture district. We note a couple of things, and one of them is, so as I read it, there's no poll tax paid.
Right.
That doesn't mean that there wasn't access to the vote necessarily. It means that from an economic decision, the decision had to be reached. And this is why poll taxes were eventually eliminated in this country. But it took until the 1960s on a national level, I want to point out. And locally, it took different times. This affected a lot of different people, but particularly poor people, Native Americans, as they gained the right to vote in the 20th century, but weren't given the right to vote in New England states, for example, places like Maine, Vermont, parts of Massachusetts, and so on until the 1940s and 50s, even though they had citizenship after 1924. African Americans, again, and then other impoverished residents who by citizenship standards had the rights to vote, but had to make that economic decision. Am I going to pay $1 to exercise the franchise or not? So that brings me back to what Mike and I had found when we find names like Paul Blackmore and Silas Freeman in the 1780s, and we see that they owned property, but we see they didn't pay a poll tax. Then we want to check in with other people and say, all right, what do people know about the Freeman family name, which we know is multi-branched, but so which Freeman are we talking about here when we talk about Silas Freeman? And who is Paul Blackmore? How long does he live in Sheffield? Why didn't he pay the poll tax? That's a hard question to answer. But the other thing that tax records show us is what's the value of other things they have. So in this case, we see that William Jones has horses, and he has a cow, and at least one swine, right? So, yeah. So for a small farm, this kind of makes sense. So go ahead, Paul.
Yeah,
sorry.
so he shows up as a laborer in the 54th record.
Right,
And
right.
so when you look around where his house was, there was the Goodell quarry just
Goodale.
Goodell quarry just east of him. And I wondered, another question for us, if we could find the record of who worked at that quarry.
Right.
And did William Jones work there? It was right in the neighborhood for him. It makes sense as a laborer that he might have worked there.
And that's a good point. We've been talking mostly about public records here, with a couple of exceptions. Obviously, the day book we talked about from the Ashley family, it now is a public record because it's in the Historical Society, but it was a private account book.
It could also be the lime kiln was right,
Right
near
there.
his house.
Yeah. So business history and business records are a really important thing that often get destroyed. A business goes out and that stuff disappears. And so we're not always able to close the loop on that story there. Again, I'll just use an example from Blandford that I was working with, which was an individual who was actually at the Boston Tea Party. We only know 65 people who were there. There were many more, but only 65 were identified between 1773 and the early 1820s. And this guy ended up living in Blandford. And he worked as a cordwainer, so he made shoes and so on. His name shows up in a cordwainer's record book, buying shoes repeatedly throughout the time period when he's living in Blandford. So you learn a lot about his household. Why is he buying so many shoes? Attached to another record, here's these other kids. So that's the kind of thing that, when you can find business records, that can help you out too, quite a bit. We should pause and ask folks out in Zoom land, but also in the room, if they have questions. We do have some items up here, but I think given the time, it's probably better for us to have questions.
Do you want me to shut the slideshow down?
So, yeah.
And if you'd like to make a comment or a question, just use the raised hand symbol. And you could also put some comments in the chat if you have.
And we have to
We'll have Paul check the chat.
turn off focus mode here.
Yeah, you can turn off focus mode, yeah.
There we go.
And then just slide down and see if somebody put a question in the chat. It might be comments about the, all right. Great, thanks. And we fixed the PowerPoint question. So, a couple of people in the room obviously asked questions as we were going along, but other comments, questions, contributions. We have a hand raised. Is that Alice?
Hi, this is Alice. Do I have permission to speak with my friend and colleague James McPherson about this project?
I mean, I don't see why
He's
not.
a noted historian of Civil
Yes,
War and has written, a number of books. And one of them I noticed, I got his book Battle Cry of Freedom, but he wrote a book on the Negro Civil War and several books related to that history. And I'm wondering if he has any documents or any resources that might be helpful. Is it okay if I talk to him about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Project? Okay, thank you.
Refer him to our website. So we do have a page that is dedicated to this project and a way that people can communicate with us through that page.
Perfect, thank you.
What's going to be the end product?
So a couple of things. I said at the outset, one of our desired results is to get the community involved in the story, right? And collect information that people maybe either didn't realize that they had or hadn't thought was important or interesting, to help expand this story. Paul can speak a little bit more to some of the other end goals. We're going to do something similar to the project that was related to the Stockbridge Mohicans, but we want to have more series like these. We're going to be talking with folks at both college students and also community people throughout Berkshire County and Hampden County on this. And then do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We had such great success with the Stockbridge Muncie Mohican exhibit, and the exhibit to this day has traveled to nearly a dozen different schools and organizations. And the thought came to us that in telling this story, why not create these large panels, 3 feet by 4 foot panels, chronicling the work that we've done and really putting out all of the information that we can gather there, and have that as a traveling exhibit for schools, for libraries, for organizations. So that's the end goal, along with pamphlets and brochures. We're working on an oral history aspect of this for Crossroads, for the Crossroads exhibit. We'll be collecting, reaching out and looking for folks to share oral histories. We have Minnie Golden's oral history that just showed up in the last couple of months from the early 1900s for oral history.
Well, it was recorded in about 1980 or.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 80s.
Yeah. So that was I see Patricia.
Patricia might know exactly when it was recorded.
That was a treasure trove to get that oral history of a Black community member, and we just want to get more and more of that. So if people have Bibles, if they have old pictures, even if the pictures are just turn of century, they will help us to tell the story, to put the whole artifacts together. As you can see from this, we don't have a whole lot of visuals. We have a few Bibles, but not of African Americans for sure. But we think that there's probably a resource. Someone has hidden in their homes information that would help this project. We just have to let people know that we're looking for that information.
Yeah.
There might be a question in the chat as well.
Has the Gutenberg project been utilized as one of your research sources?
Some, I don't know if you've used it at all. I mean, it depends on what you mean. If you can throw a clarification in the chat, if you'd like. For people unaware, that is doing a lot of digitization work of a number of different things, including narrative, historical works from earlier centuries, and so on. It's one of the things that it hasn't done as actively is digitizing public records. That's one of the, and then also historical society records and so on. That's one of those things that individual historical societies, both at the state level and then at a local level like Sheffield's, have had to undertake on their own for the most part. However, Gutenberg, as well as the Internet Archive projects, allow you to find a tremendous amount of digitized old material that you might have had to request from a library or ask for special permission to look at or whatever. And that is definitely helpful. In sort of filling in some of the stories of some of the communities.
I think Ronan had his hand up.
Oh, sure.
Hey guys, thanks so much. And I'm a teacher, and we've used the panels, the Muncie panels, and that was a huge success down at Salisbury School. I posted in the chat a Bernie Drew article about Cora Fowler, if anyone is interested. And then my question is, and I don't know anything about this, is Van Dusenville a part of Sheffield? Was that a Black community?
It's part of Great Barrington.
Okay.
And I know that there were Blacks there, and I don't know how many. I believe that there were some that were actually enslaved by the Van Dusen family in Van Dusenville.
I've reached out to the Great Barrington Historical Society, and they told us that you guys are the Van Dusenville people. So maybe a turf war there. I don't know.
We have news for them.
Well, thank you very much, guys. This was great.
Is there always conflict about North Sheffield, Great Barrington?
No, it's a fun joke.
It's a fun joke. Okay, all right. I am not a resident. I grew up in Massachusetts, but not out here. So that's I should clarify for people. Ronan, you mentioned Bernie Drew, and he put the link in, and I encourage people to take a look at that. You know, Bernie's done one of the, I mean, it's really one of the root sources that we keep going back to, and the text is in my hand, but he just threw another one, but you can pass it around the room here. So if they close the door and you go in the window, it was published about 2004, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, so this is one of the sources that we end up using to say, okay, I found a name, or Mike found a name in these tax records. Does it show up anywhere here in Bernie's work or not? It doesn't mean that it isn't still worth pursuing, but I start here and then kind of go out from there. Bernie also put down a lot of the sources he used, so then we can kind of work our way out of there. Paul, other sources that we're using that
Well, with 1 minute of free woman, by David Levison and Emily Piper, is extremely well researched and has tons of references in it as well. And one of the things that Bernie said in the back of his book, and we've talked to Bernie in the last couple of months, had him in for a chat. He, at the back of his book, he writes, I have laid out information and source material. Now it's for someone else to take this to the next step. And how fitting it was to have Bernie still be able to talk to us about that story, about his book, and for us as a society to once again discover his book and see the value in his book, and to be able to help us with this project.
Yeah, the other line that strikes me in the end there is it's past time to begin answering these questions, which I think is a really important point to keep in mind. And this is true for a lot of communities that when we talk about Native people, we talk about African Americans and other groups who are sometimes ignored in telling the history of communities. It's usually the usual excuse is, well, they're not in the archival record. And yet we've just demonstrated here several ways in which they are. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Does that mean everything's there? No, it doesn't. Yeah, it means that we still have more questions, but as Bernie pointed out, let's start answering them as well. Speaking of questions, we do have one. Sorry, does Old Parish have historical records which might include memberships of some of these families? That's a good question.
They do have. In fact, the society has some of those. They're sketchy in terms of their continuity. They're fairly strong in the mid 1800s. And there are Blacks that were members of the Congo church, as I say, too often.
Mhm. Church records, and Paul mentioned earlier, family Bibles, are also really great potential sources for these things. And particularly in our time frame, right? Because we're looking 1781-ish to about 1920. The trick is, again, what happened. We saw a slide in Jen's intro that talked about Provost Lear's involvement and connection with a church that is in the aftermath of the Civil War. That was something that a couple of weeks ago, as we were looking at that piece, we kept thinking, well, where can we find something? Do we have a record of this? And it doesn't. I took a look not last week, I guess the week before, in one of the boxes over next door, that I was hopeful, oh, maybe no, and it's just one of those things where you hope that you're going to find, and you might find it somewhere totally not in the Historical Society, obviously. It's because the church was in and out of use between 1867 and about 1907-ish, 1908, something like that. That is part of the problem. Go ahead,
Elizabeth Wood pinpointed the exact location of
the church,
of that church,
right.
And on a lot that was, if you can believe, 30 feet by 30, or was it 60? 30 by 30,
something like that. Yeah.
If you can imagine a building on a lot that was 30 feet by 30 feet, you know something about the church.
Sometimes finding it, we might want to look at the national, if there is like a publication by the national church.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they'll have like local news about a new church or
right.
a visiting minister, but so
yeah, the denomination of the church changed from time to time, and I don't have a real timeline on it,
but that's part of what we'd want to build is that timeline and understand, okay, does it move from this particular affiliation to another? It's something that, now talking about it out loud, I hadn't thought of how we might figure that exactly, but in research I was doing in the late 19th century for parts of Nebraska, when I was doing my dissertation research, that you came across that all the time. It was this, next year it was that. And then sometimes you would find, as you just pointed out, Elizabeth, here's this national report on the federated unification of two different kinds of disciplines and so on, and coming together.
Is that the little lot that's on Bears Den Road?
It's on Bears Den, yeah.
Yeah, and is it under the aegis of the church in Great Barrington?
Well, we think it probably belongs to the church in Great Barrington.
Yeah.
But we don't.
Well, that's
that
a terrific tax bill.
Because they're
30 by 30.
The contact information is the post office box of that church, so that's what we're going by.
And some of the background information, I think we had mentioned, and Ronan showed Bernie through his article here, is newspapers.com subscription, folks out in cyberspace here. It's a great resource. And so if you ask the key words and do the search, and it's kind of a little convoluted, but you can come up with stories about some of these occurrences in Sheffield for that time frame. The one that's not digitized is the Berkshire Courier, which we have in bound paper from 1862
to early 1900s.
And that requires someone sitting down like a grad student.
Turning page by page.
Yeah.
I'll relieve Mike of the cursive and have him do the newspaper. And I know he'll appreciate it, but he was actually a big help in many ways. But when we were working on the cursive, partially because he first of all gamely tried it, but he also had a TypeScript record that we were checking against the cursive names. So as I've tried to make out names, and then he was making sure, well, I think this name shows up several times in a typed version of the 1790 census. So then we were going backwards in time to the early 1780s and seeing, all right, if they showed up in the 1790 census, are they showing up in the tax records here in 1780, 81, 82, and so on? Some of that was obvious. Ashley, right? I mean, it's there. So you can see that, you can trace that very easily. But some of the other names we got down, that's our next phase, is to try to start digging in and figuring out, okay, what can we figure out about those names? Oh, all right, they're not from the African American community, or they are, and it's a name we didn't know before, and that would be super helpful. So
I mean, one of the things that's a mystery to me that did not uncover right in front of you, Nick, is that map looking.
the clicker?
No. I wanted to find out where
that's right.
William Jones's wife was buried, Mary.
Right.
And I went to the record that Nick has there. If you just show it to folks there, it's torn up. The record was torn up, but I did find an old map of the cemetery that shows William Jones, it shows Frank Jones, and it shows a plot in between the two. And I know there's no stone there, and the plot, according to the map, is empty. So where is Mary? Because we were assuming originally maybe she's buried there with William, but she's not. And she doesn't show up in the records from the center cemetery, and maybe she's in another cemetery in the town. So what happened to Mary? I'd like to know what happened to Mary. And part of that is also her children. I was thinking that Cora Jones, Cora Fowler would be, if of my age, a great grandmother. That's the generation. Right? So her children, if they were alive today, would be 70s and 80s. And then those children of those of that family. So we know that Joneses are someplace, and we'd love to be able to communicate with them.
Yeah, because she's about what, 22 in 1903, 4, something like that.
How old is Mary in the 1900 census? Because she might be in 1910 living with a child or something.
Yeah, so just more of the investigations is because
82.
We say that we end with World War I, but if we come up to this generation and work backwards as we're doing with the 54th, working backwards and working forward, we can work backwards if we have information from this generation. We can piece the pieces together back that will get us all the way back. We hope.
Yeah. Has anyone ever come across contemporaneous journals? I was thinking that the Writers Project, the WPA Writers Project, transcribed hundreds of thousands of journals and typed them. All you need is one, but I don't know.
Yeah, and they did
Have you ever come across a journal?
I haven't.
Not by the Writers Project.
They did a tremendous amount of collecting of work in all states. And I'm going to trust that you haven't seen one for Sheffield, which is too bad. But that's how I gathered a lot of information, just as Paul just described, going backwards in time with the families and communities I was trying to reconstruct in Nebraska when I was doing my research there, because somebody took the time to interview these people between 1933 and 1940-ish, and that a variation on that project was helpful for me in the thing I was doing in Blandford as well, because somebody came through and took photographs.
Yet another reason we need the New Deal back.
Yeah, another New Deal would not be unhelpful. Not only would it help people find things to do, but it would would collect information for us. Those kinds of things. I know that much more helpful in southern states and western states, but it's certainly worth coming over it again, to see did someone do something. I don't want to put Jen on the spot. Do you want to wrap things up? Because we're right past 4, or do we have other comments, questions? Wait, we have one. Oh wait, sorry. There we go. We have a comment and a statement here. Sorry. So from Chris, that has looked into the pension records. Okay, great. At the National Archives directly, which is also super helpful. Yeah,
they're actually pretty aggressively filming those.
Okay.
At this point, the Civil War widows pensions, and a lot more of them are coming online through fold3.com.
Oh, okay.
That is largely the widows' pensions that are being digitized on Fold3. There's still a lot of soldiers directly, where you still have to either have someone there in DC or write to them to get the full record. But
right,
great.
A lot of them are beginning to show up on Ancestry.
The Ancestry has oftentimes it'll have like an index but the actual records, they don't tend to have yet, at least.
Right.
But
Jim, could you mention, if you would, a little bit about your work in ancestry for the Black families of Sheffield?
I wanted to say one thing about sources, which is related to this. The vital statistics for Sheffield are quite good, actually, starting in 1843. So what I did was I started with the Sheffield Vitals. They almost, depends on who recorded them, but they almost always indicated if a person was colored or Native American. And started to put them into a database. And then we have a huge collection of obituaries. I went through the obituaries one by one, put in the children and the parents' names that you could often get from a typical obituary. And then from there, I used ancestry.com to go back in time from these Sheffield Black families. And they vary, the amount of success varies, but in some very few cases, I was able to go back even to the very, very late 1600s. As far as the ancestry goes. So for those of you who are listening and have an interest in Black family history, we may very well be able to help you with it.
How big's your database?
It's 20,000 names now.
Yeah. And we've got a helpful suggestion. It looks like from Maryland. And for us, so we'll want to save the transcript, Paul, before you exit out of here. And then looks like Ronan again asking for a name. So that's a good name for us to add. Egbert Lee. I believe I read that.
I can't say.
So
Egbert Lee.
Egbert Lee.
No, I don't know that name.
Yeah, so that's a good one for us to start looking for then. So
Thank you.
yeah, thanks. Sorry, John.
Yeah, well, I think the closing thought is that we're here to help you if you want information about your family.
Right, exactly.
But also we're seeking information from you to help us with this project. So, even if it's a year from now, reach out to us. It could be anything from a small photo or just a snippet of information. It'll help the project. We can guarantee it.
Yeah. That would be extremely helpful to us, and we would be extremely helpful to you insofar as we can.
Do we have local Black families that go back generations? Do you know?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
You know,
Yeah.
there were quite a few Black students in class when I was in
Yes.
Yeah.
There are fewer now, but no.
Jacksons,
Johnsons, of course, Croslers. The Goldens came in a bit later. Let's see. Freeman, Freeland. Both of those names. What else do we have? Newport, which is an interesting name.
The Rices.
Coffin,
Rices.
Coffin.
The Croslers were there from the beginning.
Yeah.
What are they?
The Croslers.
Yeah, from the very beginning. Yeah.
Rice.
Yeah, we mentioned Rice.
Yep.
And we do know, Patricia, that Croslers some descendants may live in Connecticut.
Yes, they live in the Crosler that you were saying. That's a great grandfather to Teddy, who recently died, but he had a lot of information. And I'm reaching out to his sister, and she's trying to give me some information that they have some old documents that we're trying to get a hold of.
I think some are in Litchfield.
They're in Southfield. So there are some in Litchfield, but they're in Southfield, and there's another Crosler string that's in Springfield. Okay,
and they often spell their name differently from the way we do.
Yes, there's two different spellings of the Croslers. There's a Lear, L-E-A-R, and L-O-R.
Yeah.
I'm in the records 4 different ways, actually.
I've seen Crosley too.
Yes. and they leave it off. Like my mother's name was Joanne, but she's often shows up as Joan, just Joan, Joan, for some reason.
And the frustration that I have is they were great with nicknames.
They are. There's a bunch of nicknames and they all went by nicknames, and you actually have to look at the dates because they all shared similar names. They're named, a lot of them had, they're not juniors, they're not seniors, they just have the same name. Right. And if you don't look at the date, you're thinking of the same person, but it's not. It's multiple, there's like 3 Jim Joneses, for example. And their father, son, cousin, brother.
And I bet that I've got 6 Benjamin Franklins in my database.
Yeah, and don't forget the Franklins, because the Franklins were cousins to the Croslers, and they had a big farm. Yeah, they had a big farm there, but they were in Ashley Falls.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know, Patricia? We're wondering if there was a Black community concentrated in Ashley Falls. We're trying to determine if there ever was one, or were they dispersed throughout Ashley Falls? I know there was on Lower Huon Street, but was there ever one closer to the village of Ashley Falls that you know?
Where I believe there was, where the Rices and the Franklins had that whole little plot there, and there was big cabins back there behind Bill Rice's house. There was a bunch of cabins, and there was a small farm that was back there. And there's remnants of those. If you walk back those woods, you'll see.
Oops, sorry. Can you give me a street?
Westall. Didn't the Franklins live on Westall?
I almost think it's a lane. If they're on that lane, if they're on that lane, it's something a lane. Who lives there now? They used to live at, there was a small wooded area and there was a trailer. Mr. Franklin lived in that trailer.
I think the Franklins were on Lower Huon Street.
No. I don't know. What's the big farm there that farm is still there. I'm trying to think of his name.
The one on the corner of Hewins and Polikoff?
That's the one.
Yeah, that was a Conklin farm.
Yeah, so Conklin, so on the other side of that, back in those woods across.
Yeah.
I think that was a Black community. I think those are the farms that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Great.
It was a small farm, because even my grandmother's house would have probably back then been considered a farm because they had farm animals. They had chickens, they had pigs or hogs. I don't know what they were, but they squealed all the time. They were huge and I was afraid of them. So I always was running the other way. But
Brady's down in there too.
The Brady, yes, that's what Brady's. So that area where the Grady's, the Franklins, and the Rices were, that had a huge community, because there was a small church that people forget about. There was a small Black church also there.
Is that right? A second one?
It's not a second one. It just was a church, or I guess it was a building, because it was, what I'm understanding from some of the relatives or the they used to go there to learn to read, and like literacy. They were illiterate, and they went there to, somebody taught them to read and write. And it has something to do with Mrs. French, or the Frenches. She used to go to that little, I guess it's like, call it a church building, and help them to learn to read and write.
That was Carlton's wife that did that.
Yes, I know. Now, can you give me a street though, a street name?
I'd have to, honestly,
yeah,
I'd ask Terry or Kim, because they lived on that street. I can just visualize it, but I don't remember it.
Okay,
but it's back there. That building is still there. That little white building that's sitting off in that corner as you're going down Route 7 toward Canaan, you're just in there. That little area in there, and if you walk back in those woods, look out for, ticks and mosquitoes. But if you walk back in those woods, I mean, we used to sneak back there to smoke cigarettes. I'm just saying, Daddy. So, saying, I hope Stephanie don't tell Daddy. Anyway, they're back, and we used to walk back in there, and there is remnants of buildings. And now I'm sure there's probably only foundations there now because nobody's keeping those up. But when we were kids,
you're coming up this summer, right? You're coming up this.
I'm coming up Memorial Day for a week, but I'm going to spend that week mostly. I'm trying to figure out.
Well, can you also go with a ride with me, and we'll look at.
Sure, we'll go. Well, I'll wear my tick boots. I'll wear my snake boots. But the thing is, I really want you guys to help me find my grandmother's family. They're trying to trace the Goldens back to their native, the connection between how the Goldens and the Native Americans are mixed. We can get records, some records on Native Americans, and we can get some records on the Goldens, but we have no idea how they cross paths and then combined the way that they did. There's no explanation on how they came together.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Good to see you. Look forward to seeing you in May.
Yes.
With tick boots. I just want to.
With my tick boots, yes.
I just want to clarify. But that's a great example. Thank you again, Patricia, because that's a great example of what we're talking about, right? And even just listening around the table, again, I'm a non-resident, so I'm looking at a lot of the physical stuff, but you all are using the stuff that you know from up here that, I could say the same thing about Sudbury, Massachusetts, but we're not going to bore everyone with that right now. But that's what is going to fill in that story for a lot of the, and get Jim on ride-alongs apparently in a variety of neighborhoods. So there you go.
Are you doing oral histories?
Well, that's part of what we hope. Yeah, we hope will come out from this. Yeah, ultimately.
We know Patricia Wright will be doing an oral history with us when you come. Just be ready.
And Mr. Rice is getting on.
Yes.
We saw him at the Elizabeth Freeman, and he would be really good to get an oral history from, as well as.
Yep.
I'm not sure race history, but that would be also.
Done has done some actually.
Good.
For us, yeah.
But has he focused on other families in the area, or has it been more his own story?
His own story.
I'd ask him to.
Ray is not really tightly tied into the Black community of Sheffield.
Okay.
He's more Great Barrington and Stockton. Patricia pointed that out to me, I believe, initially, and I thought true.
And dad's transplant too. My dad's a transplant. He's not from, he's lived there 60 some odd years, but he's a transplant. He only came there because my mother refused to go back south with him. But so he's a transplant, and his ties are more in North Carolina and Georgia, not necessarily Sheffield. But you have a lot of families that are still there. I hate that they're starting to die, unfortunately, and we didn't think to capture their stories before they left. And in fact, I'm just finding out about 2 relatives that had died, and I thought, hey, I was going to try to reach out to them during Memorial Day and see if I could get some recordings from them, but unfortunately they died. So I think it's important about your project is you got to get them on record, and you got to listen, because we're all losing that. There's not a lot of interest. I've tried to drum up some interest with the families that are there. They're just not really interested in that, because some of it's painful for some of the family members. Some of it's very painful. And so they just rather forget it. And they just don't know how important it is to try to push past that and to get some record of it. But I keep trying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I just want to announce, as part of the Sheffield-wide Crossroads exhibit, it's Changes in Rural America, we are going to be having an exhibit here in the Dan Raymond House that focuses on the farmers who are also Mass 54 soldiers. So we'll have a small exhibit here that we welcome you all to come, and keep an eye out for some of the other programs that we're going to be doing related to this project and exhibits over the next year and possibly even into 2024.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great, very nice.
Thanks to everyone out there as well.
You see our current on veterans graves fitting in with this.